This meeting is being recorded. I will never not say that at the beginning of these things since they implemented. I'm the only one in this meeting, and she still had to tell me it's being recorded. Hey everyone, I just wanted to give an update from Tampa from the new Discourses workshop. The final session just ended, and I'm like, man, I didn't. I laid awake for so long last night. I couldn't sleep. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to stay awake today, but I was glued to James, obviously everything he was talking about. It's like drinking through a fire hose, to be honest. So I'm like in the kind of marinate, and then I got to go back through my notes. The Wi-Fi kept disconnecting, and by that I mean it disconnected when I go into the conference room, and then it would never reconnect until I left. They have some dude, get this, they have this there's conference Wi-Fi that you have to pay for in order to have Wi-Fi. So it's like if you're right outside the door of the conference room, you got your guest room Wi-Fi, but then when you're in there, anyway, it's a racket. But it's the hotel. It's not a new Discourses thing. So my notes are like riddled with spelling errors because I'd be like typing hella fast and like not looking at the screen, and it wasn't connected to Wi-Fi to do like a spell check on it. So I got to go back through my notes. I was just looking at it before I press record, and this is like everything is basically underlined in red squiggles. Like, I'm pretty sure that word's consciousness, but we'll see. Yeah, so I mean, just a few things to tell you guys, that are kind of off the top of my head. I don't have anything planned for this, but I was like, man, I told him I would like keep him posted and provide all these updates, and it's like just been go, 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 and I haven't been able to. And so I feel bad. I don't want you guys to think that it was like, hey, thanks for the money, thanks for sending me, and then that's it. So I'm gonna try and like I at least have, I think, two different pieces of content that I can get out of these notes, maybe more that are like really solid in my mind right now. And there's so many connections to the stuff that Kevin and I are doing with Road to Serfdom. I'd already said bye to James and everything and came up to my room, and I almost went back down there. I actually started to go down the steps, and I was like, no, I mean, I already told him, everything, this can wait. I'll tell him some other time. But one of the things I wanted to tell him, and I'll probably just DM him this, is, because I'd asked him, I think last night, I asked him if he'd ever read The Road to Serfdom, because he talks about a lot of the stuff in terms of the strategies of these people, and he's quoting people who said some of the stuff like in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and later. And it's like a lot of this is stuff that Hayek warned about, And so I asked him if he'd read Road to Serfdom. He's like, no, it's like on the list of like 200 books I need to read. And I said, Hayek would be doing these events with you, just so you know. So like he'd be someone who I think you should look into. But one of the things I wanted to tell him is that he has intellectual forebears. Like he tracks the intellectual through line of a lot of these, of all these Marxists and stuff. I'm sitting on the floor. I have to get comfortable here. And like he doesn't spend much time tracking like his own intellectual forebears in this space, and I think he'd get a lot of encouragement out of that. Like Hayek, Milton Friedman, Mises, Lord Acton, Tocqueville. Tocqueville and Acton are people that I'm just now digging into, John Stuart Mill. Anyway, but man, there were so many connections to Road to Serfdom that I'm like, I wrote Road to Serfdom next to it in a lot of places in my notes, but I'm going to go back and go through it. So Kevin, get excited. I'm going to be like, for the next however many videos, like prefacing so many sentences with whatever I was at the new Discourses thing. So I'm sorry ahead of time. But yeah, so that was cool. Like just seeing it's cool, plus discouraging. I've said this before about how, whenever you hear Thomas Sowell debunk the gender wage gap in the 1970s, you're like, wow, he masterfully did that, and then you're like, oh, wait a second. So wait, this information was out there 50 years ago and people still didn't listen. But anyway, so it was cool to hear him debunk things or like call out things that Hayek was also calling out, but it's, it's the same thing where it's like, it's neat, but it's also discouraging because Hayek himself was writing, he's like, we already had these arguments. Why are we having the same arguments in Great Britain? We settled this 20 years ago in Austria. But one of the things that was really neat, like just encouraging, was I think there was maybe about 80 people here. This event was like, planned and put out there fairly last minute. And a lot of people showed up. There's people all the way from like Hawaii, from California, Washington, New York, and they were all passionate about fighting this stuff. They're all engaged. They're all informed. I talked to some super interesting folks. There's a gal named Erica that I talked to who is a pediatrician, and she was talking about fighting this stuff in the American Academy of Pediatricians, and I think she's trying to get a chapter of FAIR started where she lives. I met another guy who is also a part of FAIR. There was a gal who was from New York, who super smart gal. I think she was originally from Germany, and she's got a chapter of FAIR going on, and I think she said in the Hudson Valley. And so, fighting it there. And so just like meeting all these different people, there was a guy who's a physicist who just left his position at one university to go to a different one that, wasn't teaching all this crap. And people were just engaged, like we went out. So yesterday it was just Carlin and I went out to lunch, but then today it was like me, Carlin, and I don't know, like maybe 13 other people, and just sitting and talking and just hearing people engage in this stuff and talk about how they're fighting it was really cool. Like there was this one gal who she's an adjunct professor somewhere in Oklahoma, and she was talking about like they had to do some training, and she was like, this is compelled speech, and no one cares about adjunct professors, but she was able to get like these other professors to say, hey, do you know this is compelled speech, and push back there. And dude, she had a crazy story about this is another thing that related to actually the last chapter that Kevin and I did on Road to Serfdom, where there's this quote about how like the rich and prosperous in a planned society are actually not as free and not as well off, and it's not as stable as people that are poor in a free society. Because if you're poor, you can generate your own wealth, you can work your way up. Of course, it's harder, if you start from that position, but you can do it, and it's more stable. Whereas if you're in a totalitarian society and you're wealthy, it's extremely unstable. You step out of line and it's gone. The state giveth and the state taketh away. And she told a story exactly like that, man. She was in Saudi Arabia. She grew up all over. I think they're originally from Egypt, and she was in Saudi Arabia, and she told this crazy story about how her father like made all this money because he did this stuff for the government, and like they had house cleaners, and her mom had like a private driver, and they had a car given to them and stuff. But she went abroad for education. She was in America, and she came back, and she had like a Bible and a history book, and they like pulled her out of line at customs. And she had a bunch of books. She had like Latin and science and some other stuff, but the Bible and the history book were the ones that they were really pissed off about. And they're like, you're a traitor, you're a dissident. And they forced her back on the plane. She was 14. She was like afraid, who knows what's going to happen. Like the guy literally put a gun barrel to the back, to her back, and like forced her back on the plane. And she stayed on that plane for like forever, never made it to see her dad. And then they made her go and sign some paperwork saying she was a traitor. And then she was on house arrest for 5 days, and just like crazy stuff like that, where they have to, bribe the government and stuff. And I read her that quote from Hayek. I was like, does this resonate with your experience? And she's like, wow, yeah, that's exactly right. Just hearing her story was super cool. And how she's like raising her kids. She's like, yeah, my kids, like her son was going to go to a university in, I believe, Oklahoma. And she said that she's like, I wish I would have taken a picture of this, but whenever he was like, he got like a bunch of scholarships, I think. And he was going through like the registration process after he'd already got accepted. And there was like a drop down list of like 64 genders, and they wanted to know your pronouns and your sexual orientation, all this other stuff. And her son was like, I just can't do this. And so then he went to another school, but like how she raised her kids to like be aware of that, So there's just lots of stories like that that are like really neat. Like the people here, well, they, they care. And so I guess it's encouraging to see that. Like what's funny is they didn't end up taking questions for the very last session, but the last question I was going to ask him was like about morale. Cause he had this whole thing at the end of like, what do we do about this? And like, how do we, unite like back under, like we have to have shared values. Like we have to have like universal values, as opposed to this divisive crap that's like pits us against each other. We have to find that commonality, the liberalism, that in the good sense, that Hayek talks about, not in this crap, the way we understand it today. And he was like, people do value freedom. People do value liberty and truth. And I was just like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not sure that COVID has taught us that people value freedom, like, or that truth is something even remotely relevant, to how power is wielded. And so I wanted to ask him a question of like, not trying to be pessimistic and cynical, but how much to, like, what percentage of the population do you think values truth enough to do something, kind of thing. And so I would have liked to have gotten his thoughts on that, but I guess I could have asked him whenever it was done. So I went up and talked to him for a minute, and Carlin took a picture with us, and then Carlin and I got a picture. It was pretty sweet. Actually, that gal from Oklahoma took the picture for us. So thank you if you end up watching this. But I didn't want to be like a cynical, kind of ask him a really cynical question. I feel like I always do that, where I'm like, look to these people to be like, hey, I'm really black-pilled. Can you please help me not to be black-pilled? It's like, I'm sure they're fighting the same thing, But yeah, it was super cool. It was super cool. So I've got like 10 pages of notes I need to go back through. I think the first thing, I don't know how many videos I'll make, but he did. So like the first night he went through what he called like the core, like 13 tenets of critical theory. So I'll probably try to like flush that out a little bit and do that in a post. Maybe I'll put that on Medium. I don't know. I might just put on Locals if it ends up being short enough. And then there is one part that I think is really good about, I think this was the third session where it was your third or fourth? Sorry, this is like, it all runs together, where he had this quote where he said, critical race theory is as critical race theory does. And he had this whole thing about like, where he addressed, this in education, where like, we're not actually teaching critical race theory. And he kind of dug into that some. And so I'd like to get more into that. Like there was this quote for like, man, I retweeted it on, well, obviously on Twitter, but Missouri's governor had this, the most feckless, cowardice bullcrap. Like he had this like 3-tweet thread where he was like, critical race theory is divisive and has no business in our classrooms. But fortunately, most schools in Missouri aren't teaching critical race theory. Instead, they're teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion to help prepare students for the workforce and real life and to understand each other's differences. And you can do that without critical race theory. It's like, no, you can't. Like, yeah, I told Carlin, I'm like, this is like saying, look, we don't teach Nazism, only anti-Semitism. Like, you know what I mean? So it's just like, it's just crap like that. So but the point is that James kind of engaged with some of that stuff of like, what do you do with the rhetorical gymnastics that they do? And they're, at one point he was like, it turns out you can't trust a Marxist. How about that? And so it's like, yep, sure can't. Or the useful idiots propagating their crap. So anyway, so I think that's something that I kind of want to flesh out at some point. And there was at least one other thing, like the action, how do you, it's funny, there's so much of the stuff that the people who engage in this crap, that they say that it's like they project their garbage onto us, like Robin DiAngelo, I think I've said we need a Dear Diary account for all of Robin DiAngelo's, racist nonsense she projects on the rest of us, like Jim Acosta, someone made that like Dear Diary Jim Acosta account. We need one of those for Robin DiAngelo. But they also happen to be pretty correct in their assessment of like the proper actions, like what they say they should be doing is what we should be doing, so they don't just project their problems onto us. They actually project their solutions, when they talk about praxis and how we have to put this stuff into practice. Like that's true. Like we have to also put this stuff into practice, like anti-racism. Like there is no not racist. You have to actually be anti-racist. Like at this point in time, James said something at the end where he was like, you got to know what time it is. You got to know like where you are in history, and you might not like, you have to do this. But you have to. Like, sound familiar? Like, this is a thing I've said before. Every era, every age, every time has something it demands of the people living in that time. And it's not necessarily fair. It's not necessarily fun. But that's not the question. The question is it necessary? And right now it's like, there is no woke or not woke. You have to be actively against this stuff, anti far left orthodoxy, as I would say. And so, like that part was super interesting whenever he got into the actionable parts of it. There's one thing I wish he would have added, but it's okay. The dude just crushed it. I mean, you could tell he like was really putting a lot into it. He went over on time almost every single time. Like that's a good thing, right? Like he had a lot to say, and he was just putting it out there. And, I didn't realize this is the first event of this type that they've done. And I think, they recorded it. They're going to turn it into like a video series and a book series and stuff. So it's cool to kind of be at the first one of those. Also, again, thanks to you guys. So yeah, so there's a lot there. I got to get into these notes. I mean, you can see the freaking rings under my eyes, man. I look like a meth head, like I'm staying up, all hours of the night. I'll tell you a side story. This it's totally unrelated to literally anything I just said, but it's a funny story and I'm tired. And so I'm going to tell you. A buddy of mine's brother worked for the DEA once, and there was this house that they were suspicious might be a meth den. That had like a lab or something in it, and had like tinfoil on the windows and stuff, that kind of thing. And they didn't have a search warrant yet, so they needed to get a warrant. So they were going by one night to go and like search the trash to see if there's something they could use for a search warrant. And they went there like 3 a.m, and the people, they had like floodlights turned on, and they're out mowing their yard at like 3 a.m. And they're like, yeah, this is probably a meth house. Anyway, but I imagine that's what the bags under my eyes, or what the bags under their eyes probably look like. Although I probably have more teeth. Not by much, I imagine, though. Anyway, okay, so that's it. Yeah, the Benjamin Boyce conversation, I think, released today. I think Carlin and I's second episode of Unscrewed should have released today as well. I probably should have spaced those out, but whatever, that's fine. The next thing I'm going to try to do, I think the next thing I'm going to do is hopefully just like some video about some of this stuff. There's another one I want to do, it's like a comprehensive analysis of exactly what far left orthodoxy is, because we focus a lot on critical race theory, which is fine. Like critical theory is important. Critical race theory is important, but it's just one way that these demagogues, these activists that are trying to impose this crap on us are like, they have all these methods of trying to seize control of our society, of take the reins of power, to seize government and assert total control. I think climate is another one where you could say it's pretty obvious they're trying to take total control. COVID has now become that. And so it's like, I want to try to do some kind of like really robust breakdown of that. And then there's another thing I want to get into about like the load bearing occupations in society. And like, I've alluded to this before of just like what's at stake here. And like why it's so important that we have to fix this stuff now. Because we're at risk of not having a competent physicist class. We're at risk of not having a competent medical, field. We're at risk of not having competent engineers, and so on and so forth. And those are like load bearing occupations. I don't know if you saw they're going to add women to the draft, which I think that's not even a statement about like whether I think women should be frontline soldiers. I just think it's that damn patriarchy, protecting women from being forced into military service. I think that's wrong, and my buddy who's in the Army told me I need to look into the new physical fitness standards that they've implemented to make things more equal, and I think my response was like, I legitimately wonder if this military or the military they're creating would have been able to succeed at Omaha Beach, in Normandy, D-Day. Like, would this version of the military that they're creating, whatever this batshit, nonsense, equity driven, garbage is, like, would it be able to succeed? Like, probably not. And that's probably the point, right? You know, China knows that. They're like, yeah, make no standards for your military whatsoever. That would be awesome for us. Anyway, so those are the things that are on the top of my head that I'm thinking about, that I need to get some coherent outlines on and some scheduling done. Tomorrow I fly out really early. I'm going to be in Montana for a week, helping my father-in-law. That his church partnered with some church up there, and it's going to be some kind of mission, like, work trip, which I was afraid it was going to overlap with this. Whenever I told my wife I was, like, starting a GoFundMe, she's like, I got you a ticket to go to Montana to help my dad. I hope it doesn't overlap. And it turned out it worked perfectly. So that's really nice, because I would have hated to have to tell my father-in-law I couldn't go to Montana and help him out, because, like, one of the reasons I was going, so, like, no one from their church, like, signed up to go. And I was like, well, that's fine, I can go help. And plus it gives me brownie points with the in-laws, which is always a good thing. They don't watch this, so it's okay, I can say that. Honestly, they're cool people, so they would laugh. But anyway, I'm hoping sometime in there I can get some time to, like, write some of this stuff down, and even just, like, to do some posts with just snippets from my notes and stuff. Okay, so that's it. I'll just end up rambling about nonsense and telling more stories about, you know, meth people mowing their yard if I keep going. So I'll be done here. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for being awesome. And yeah, I just really appreciate, like, this opportunity. This is super cool. And I'm really glad that I got to be here. I'm excited. You know, I was texting my buddy who is also in education back where I'm from, and just, like, how can we put this stuff, or, like, the stuff I'm learning, and how can we, like, put it in digestible bites to give to people on our school board that are concerned and stuff like that. So it's, like, the whole other thing I have to do with this is, like, what's the irreducible minimums here that I can give to people to arm them with, you know, in my community. So there's just a lot, but it's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have. So anyway, I appreciate you guys. If you're not already following me on Twitter, please go give me a follow at My Mundane Mind. Join my locals community, returntoreason.locals.com. My community is amazing. You guys are awesome. So thankful for you. Seriously, like, it's the best. I can see, like, what Bridget Fedesi posts a lot about, like, just how awesome, you know, her locals community is. And as mine has grown, I've been like, I get it. I see it. Like, it really is encouraging. Like, every little thing, you know, it's hard to do this in this space with, like, no feedback or encouragement whatsoever. And so just even those little things are just huge. And then the big things, like sending me here, you know, I wouldn't be able to be here if it weren't for you guys. So thank you for that. Subscribe to me on YouTube. That's a Return to Reason as well. Yeah, and that's it. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Peace.